After these considerations, we are now able to come up with a more precise definition of what is a supply chain. We started with saying that a supply chain is a network of logistics activities. Now, let's look at a more precise definition of a supply chain that was created by Christopher. Christopher wrote, a supply chain is a network of organizations that are involved through upstream and downstream linkages in the different processes and activities that produce value in the form of products and services in the hands of the ultimate customer. So he highlights that the goal of the supply chain is to create value, and for whom is the value created? The ultimate customer, the customer that at the end finally consumes the product. There might be different suppliers of suppliers, different tier levels in a supply chain, and of course they need to sell to each other, but in the end, if the final customer is not interested in the final product or service, then the supply chain will fail. And again, he mentioned that the supply chain is a network. Now we write a network of organizations. Organization is typically a company, but it can also be a non-profit organization. For example, Geotech is also involved in some kind of supply chain. We create education as a product and service, and we are involved with different stakeholders, for example, the Ministry of Higher Education or Oman Accreditation Authority. And then the question is, who are the final customers of Geotech? You might think that the students are the final customers. However, I don't believe this. I have a different point of view. The final customers of Geotech is in the end the society of Oman and the broader region, who use our students, and if they are not well educated, then they will not benefit from them. So if the students are Geotech's final customers, this would mean we could easily satisfy them by just giving them good grades, making them happy. But then what value do these students produce for the society? How can they improve the economy of Oman? The economy of Oman, the society of Oman needs brave students, young, well-educated students who are able to face some challenges, who are able to survive some challenges, if I want to say this. And therefore the society of Oman is in the end the final customer of Geotech. So what is important? Typically in a supply chain we are talking about legally separated companies. There's not one company that owns everything. This would make supply chain decisions still difficult, but a little bit easier. There's a bigger challenge if the companies are legally separated, because they need to cooperate voluntarily. So for each company there needs to be an added benefit for participating in the supply chain. And the link between these companies happens through different flows of material, information and money. What you can find in the literature, you can find discussions about supply chains in a more narrow sense or in a broader sense. Though in the broader sense, these are the supply chains covered by this definition. We call these supply chains inter-organizational supply chains. They happen among independent, legally separated organizations. And this is the holy grail of supply chain management. On the other hand, in particular in very big companies, think for example of PDO, we often face big challenges in just managing our own logistics activities in such a big company, and often these companies also talk about supply chain management of their company-owned resources, which is also challenging, but it's a little bit less challenging because there's a unique central owner who can make, in the end, the hard decisions. So if you talk to people from PDO, they might have a different understanding about what a supply chain is than when you talk to logistics people from maybe smaller companies, because they are more often involved in these inter-organizational supply chains. Now, why do we have a supply chain? We have a supply chain, or we look at the concept of supply chains, because once this is clear that there is this network of activities and they depend on each other, it also becomes clear that there's almost no single company, no single organizational unit that is alone responsible for delivering the customer value. There's not a single company who is responsible for delivering the customer value, because every company depends on their suppliers, and these suppliers, these tier 1 suppliers, depend on their tier 2 suppliers, etc. Though if they are not coordinating their activities, they will not be able to fulfill the final customer's need. And an individual company will become part of a supply chain if this presents a win-win situation for all the members in the supply chain in the long run. Maybe in the short run, you have to have some additional expenses because the coordination is difficult. You need to invest in more IT. You need to negotiate complex contracts. But in the long run, this should be beneficial for everyone. If it's not beneficial for everyone, these companies will drop out of the supply chain. And when we are talking about competitiveness of supply chain, we already had in this course a lengthy discussion of performance measurement criteria, different level, operational, strategic, societal level. So please go back to these definitions and this discussion to understand the performance of supply chains. And when we are talking about supply chains and increasing their competitiveness, we often, or typically, we have two approaches to increase the competitiveness. On the one hand, we improve the cooperation between the supply chain companies, and we do this through a better integration, and that means the flows of materials and the flow of information is better aligned, adjusted, and we have a better coordination of the material, information, and financial flows. So you see, managing a supply chain is even more complicated than managing the individual activities of a company, the functional activities of a company. And this is the reason why we have a broader look at supply chain management.